Ovo su ideje HR. Danas razgovaramo o najnovijim potezima mađarskih vlasti i uopće mađarskom pozicioniranju u odnosu na rusku agresiju na Ukrajinu, ali i pokušaj Europske unije da odgovori na tu agresiju. Naš gost bit će američki znanstvenik Marc Loustau.
Viktor Orban is a puppet of Vladimir Putin, and Hungary is a puppet state of the Russian government. He is facing the greatest threat to his rule in Hungary in his 16 years in power since 2010. Orban has even begged for an economic bailout, and Trump has basically said, thanks, no thanks.
Viktor Orban pokušava naći bilo koji način da ruska nafta stigne u Mađarsku. Jedan od pritisaka koje mađarska vlada u ovom trenutku poduzima usmjeren je i na Hrvatsku, jer Orban želi da ruska nafta poteče i JANAF-om. S druge strane, pokušavajući prisiliti Ukrajinu da reaktivira naftovod Družba, Orban prijeti i Briselu, odnosno pokušava blokirati veliki europski plan pomoći Ukrajini težak 90 milijardi eura. Što se iza svega toga krije i zašto Orbana zapravo možda uopće ne muči Ukrajina, sve to čućete u razgovoru s našim današnjim gostom. To je Marc Loustau, novinar i znanstvenik iz Sjedinjenih Američkih Država, inače i suradnik Centralno-Europskog sveučilišta. Mr. Loustau, welcome to IDEE.
Thank you.
Is this Budapest story about Ukraine, or is it actually story about Hungarian politics?
It's a little of both. Certainly the domestic scene, the domestic context in Hungary is very important. Orban absolutely has his eyes on the home front. He is facing the greatest threat to his rule in Hungary in his 16 years in power since 2010. And that's coming from an opposition candidate and party, the candidate being Petera Magyara and the party being the TISA party. And every independent poll says that the TISA party and Petera Magyara are up by between 7 and 11%. Of the vote count. And so that's a significant threat to Orban's power, and he's certainly worried about it. And his rhetoric and his actions towards Ukraine absolutely are intended to try to bolster his standing at the polls. But there are also several other geopolitical factors that are at play in the conflict with Ukraine over the Druzhba oil pipeline. And that's absolutely that Viktor Orban and Hungary have grown a lot closer to Russia and to Vladimir Putin in recent years, and increasingly after the 2022 full-scale invasion. At this point, it's probably fair to say that Viktor Orban is a puppet of Vladimir Putin, and Hungary is a puppet state of the Russian government.
But Orban is doing a hard job to stay in power. He is ready to unseen, at least in Europe, unseen moves. So do you think that this approach can result with TISA staying in opposition after elections in April?
Well, Orban has so radically tilted the playing field in his own favor domestically in Hungary, that it's very possible that even if TISA wins a majority of the votes, or even a large majority of the votes, Viktor Orban could still stay in power because he has so skewed the electoral system in his own favor. It is a very complicated set of mathematics and independent seats, single constituency districts, and then the party list, and it goes on, and it's actually just way too complicated. But the short version of the story is that Viktor Orban already has a huge advantage just before the voting even begins in Hungary. And so it's very possible that he could manage to stay in power. Even so, it does very possibly look like he could lose to the tune of a significant parliamentary majority for TISA and Petera Magyar. And Orban is growing increasingly desperate. It's very possible that if under Hungarian law, what Orban has done over the last 16 years in terms of official governmental corruption and providing secret sweet deals to his own friends economically to enrich them, that he actually might count under Hungary's existing law as a criminal, that what he's done amounts to criminal activity. Criminal racketeering and criminal corruption. And if that's the case, it's very possible that he could face legal action if Petera Magyara wins. And so it's very true that he's very concerned. He's very worried. He's very worried about maybe even going to jail. And so he's going to do really everything in his power to stay atop the government.
Do you think that we should be afraid of, or even some illegal moves if he loses elections?
Well, the fact is that under the basic European values of fairness and freedom in elections, under basic European values of the rule of law and anti-corruption, he already has done illegal things. It's already the case that that Europe really should consider him an outlaw. So,
but should we be afraid? Should we be afraid that he will maybe reject results?
So I don't think that will happen. I mean, who knows? It's hard to say exactly what he's capable of. He has some very nefarious and some very, I would say, inscrutable and dangerous allies in the Kremlin. So who knows what they will do on his behalf, independent of what he himself does to win the election.
How would you describe relations between Orban and Putin? Because he claims that he just wants peace, but it is obvious that he's the weakest part of European politics toward Russia.
Absolutely. But just to finish my previous thought, I don't think that he will cancel the elections, because that would be a public and open admission that he's failed politically. So I think what he will do is walk right up to the line of trying to make certain that the elections go his way. I think canceling the elections outright would actually be would not be a benefit to him. So we'll see what he does, but I don't think that would be to his own benefit, canceling the elections outright, at least ahead of time, or even saying that the elections were fraudulent. His relationship with Putin is strange and mercurial. I think partly it's a matter of economic benefits. That he certainly has modeled the Hungarian economy after the current state of the Russian economy. And he does, in effect, Vladimir Putin's bidding within the EU. In recent days, especially since he's blocked the 90 billion euro aid package to Ukraine, that has caused significant outrage within the EU, and you've seen significant figures like the leader of the Lithuanian government has called for finally ejecting Hungary from the EU. I don't know if that's the right move, but certainly something, maybe a half measure would actually be just as effective, which is taking away Hungary's ability to veto collective action by the EU. I think that should be the next step considered by the EU if Viktor Orban does manage to stay in power.
Yes, somehow the atmosphere in Brussels looks like everybody are waiting April till the final move. From your perspective, what would mean for European Union and for Russia if Viktor Orban stays in power?
Well, for the EU, it would be something near a catastrophe. were Viktor Orban to stay in power, and certainly collective action to limit the ability of Orban to be a spanner in the spokes of the wheel of the EU would be, I think, justified and necessary. Something to some kind of action to limit the veto power that Hungary has over collective decisions, but then even to censure and to provide even greater amounts of economic pressure on Hungary. Right now, the EU is withholding significant amounts of funding to Hungary over its violations of the rule of law. And I think that policy should be deepened and strengthened were Viktor Orban to remain in the EU. The kind of economic pressure that's being exerted on Hungary has certainly been felt all throughout the country. And it's become a significant campaign issue to the benefit of TISA and Petera Magyara, who have argued that, in fact, Orban is punishing his own country because of his policy of violating the rule of law. And that's certainly held. Go ahead.
And if he loses power, what would it mean for Russia? I mean, in that case, they should count more, for example, on politicians like Babiš and Fico in Czech and Slovak Republic, but they are not, at least they don't look like they are ready to do everything what Orban is ready to do.
Well, I think the people who, or the person who would lose the most in the case of an Orban loss would be Vladimir Putin. I think that's very clear that Vladimir Putin, it's in his best interest for Viktor Orban to stay in power. And so I think not only is Viktor Orban nervous about the elections come April 12th, but I think Vladimir Putin is. And we should be very concerned that Vladimir Putin might take some kind of independent action to keep Viktor Orban in power, whether that's a false flag operation, some kind of military action on the border between Ukraine and Hungary. Who knows what it could be? But I think that's definitely something that Vladimir Putin, we should be very concerned about and we should be very aware of.
A little bit more. Yes, please.
So in terms of Robert Fico and Slovakia, it actually, to my mind, it doesn't seem like Fico is as strong a Putin ally as Viktor Orban is and has been. I think Robert Fico is influenceable, could end up being more of a figure like Giorgia Meloni in Europe than Viktor Orban. Orban has done everything that Vladimir Putin wants, and has shown absolutely no ability to change his policy under pressure from Brussels. Fico seems to show a little bit more flexibility. Just recently, he's announced that he is intending to visit Kyiv and to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. And that, to me, shows a certain kind of openness to the Ukrainian perspective that Viktor Orban has never shown.
A little bit more about European Union and credibility and unity. In a way, of course, this is the problem for European Union, but it is also the opportunity to deal with some difficult issues which are anyway in front of the European Union as a union which has to evolve in some high level of cooperation and coordination.
Absolutely. And I think the EU is recognizing that its original design is not functioning and is not capable of functioning in the current changing global order, where we're seeing bad actors emerge from within the ranks of the EU, like Hungary, and where there's a world order where you have Vladimir Putin willing to violate basic laws, basic rules of national sovereignty and respecting the borders of countries within close to Russia, and then also the United States not respecting rule of law and international policies and procedures. We're emerging into a new, highly chaotic global order, and the EU needs to acknowledge that and act upon it. And it seems to be doing that in its own slow way. And here, what I'm thinking of is the possibility of a two-speed European Union, where you have certain larger powers within the EU, like France and Germany, who are able to pull together with other states to set policies on a more emergent and urgent level in response to dramatic actions that need to be taken or need to be responded to, and then a broader coalition that can take action on on a unanimous basis that would include smaller states like Slovakia and Ukraine, as well as the bigger states like France and Germany. This two-speed option, I'm not sure if it's actually going to be functional or if it's actually going to be working, but it is at least a sign that Europe is recognizing that its current design is not working right now in a newly chaotic global order.
And the European Union also has to be aware that some stronger union would have even more, maybe not enemies, but definitely politicians who will hate it even more, like Donald Trump, because even this EU is too much EU for him.
Yes. Well, those are two separate questions. A stronger, more federal EU really would take a radical re-envisioning of what the European Union is about and what it's capable of doing, and the actions that it could possibly take on the global stage. And that's a broader, I think it'll involve a philosophical debate. It'll involve some basic changes to the structure of the union, and that is going to take a longer period of time. And I don't know if I'm in this moment capable of commenting on it. In terms of the relationship with the United States, it is absolutely clear, I think, to any clear-eyed, objective observer that the European Union can no longer rely upon America in the way that it once did. And it needs to take stock of the fact that American politics, and I don't even think for the short term, I think for the long term, American politics will be driven by people who have a more antagonistic attitude and view of the European Union. And I think Europe needs to recognize that it's not just that America can no longer be counted on as a stable ally, but America might actually be acting against Europe's interest. And that requires a really fundamental rethinking of that bilateral relationship. Europe needs to be more independent, and it needs to be capable of acting in a swifter and more decisive mode. And that, I think, is a set of challenges that are being posed by this change, or being forced upon Europe by this change in America's attitude towards it.
In a way, the case of Viktor Orban also shows this new situation. From one point, the United States and Donald Trump wants Europe to be militarily more capable. On the other side, they are supporting Orban, who claims that he doesn't want military stronger European Union, for example, or deeper involving in defending Ukraine from Russian aggression.
Yeah, I think the first part of that statement is just patently false, and the second part is patently true. If you judge someone by their actions, right? And in America, the Trump administration has acted to undermine Europe's unity and its capacity for decisive action, even as it says rhetorically that it wants a stronger and more independent EU. And I just don't think that we can believe those statements. I think those statements are, at best, window dressing, at best meant to, but at worst, meant to delude the EU into believing that America actually has its own interests at heart. And I don't think that we can really say that about the Trump administration. So I think it's better to judge the Trump administration on its own actions, which is right now basically supporting Hungary, giving it a full-throated support of a full-throated endorsement in the current election campaign, and then seeing how Hungary undermines European unity.
And talking about this Trump endorsement of Viktor Orban, how efficient do you think it is, and how much can Trump help Orban, maybe even financially?
Well, that is the interesting thing, is that when a country and a leader relies on Donald Trump, it is a very dangerous bet. And it's clear to me that Orban is losing that bet. Yes, it's true that America has tried to undermine European unity, especially through Trump's endorsement of Hungary, but that endorsement actually has not produced the kinds of results that Viktor Orban would want. Orban has even begged for an economic bailout, and Trump has basically said, thanks, no thanks, and has completely shut the door in his face. If Orban was counting on American support in any concrete way to help him win re-election, he has certainly not gotten it. And Orban is in a really tight place in this election, I would say, in large part, because Trump has not actually come to his aid.
And talking about opposition, the story of Petera Magyar and TISA party is very interesting. It is actually, Magyar is in a way a rebel from Orban's Fidesz party.
Absolutely. I think analysts who accurately describe TISA's role in the political landscape of Hungary right now describe him as Viktor Orban, but without Orbanism. So you get all the things that people wanted when they originally voted for Viktor Orban in 2010. A certain right-wing political orientation, a certain conservatism on social issues, a certain Hungary first attitude, and a skepticism towards Brussels. But you don't get the Russian-style corruption. That's what Hungary's voters are rejecting. And you don't get being best friends with Vladimir Putin. Because both of those things that Viktor Orban has engineered over the last 16 years, both of those things have isolated Hungary within the EU and have actually hurt the Hungarian economy. And that is what Hungary's voters are really thinking about right now, now that the election campaign is heating up. They're thinking about their pocketbooks. They're thinking about whether their kids can get good jobs. Right now, the fact is that one of the richest individuals in Hungary is Viktor Orban's son-in-law, who married Viktor Orban's daughter. And I think Hungary's voters are realizing that unless their kids are lucky enough to marry Viktor Orban's daughter, their kids are not going to get a good job. And that is what that question, that factor, that calculus is what is driving the political change right now, the wave of political change that might drive Viktor Orban out of power.
And Orban is so afraid of Petera Magyar being better him that he was ready on unbelievable dirty operations trying to show that Petera Magyar is immoral, also corruptive. It is something which is not very usual, I would say, in European mainstream politics. This kind of campaign Orban is doing.
I mean, I'm just going to go and put it in rather stark terms. It's pretty insane in relative terms to other electoral campaigns that we've seen around the continent. It's really remarkable and rather unique. The kind of personal character-based attacks that we've seen on Petera Magyar. But what's equally remarkable is that none of it has worked. They have tried to slander Petera Magyar as a nasty human being, as an unpleasant character, as a really ugly kind of individual, And Hungary's voters don't care. That's the remarkable thing, is that they have tried every dirty trick in the book to make Petera Magyara into this sort of really unpleasant person to be around. And what Hungary's voters are showing by still sticking by this candidate is that they are very practical thinkers. They care about their pocketbooks and they care about their kids' futures. And also that Viktor Orban himself has proved that he is himself a rather nasty character. And they're sort of fed up with that.
On the other side, we have a situation that for the first time in many elections, Orban now is in jeopardy of losing, but losing from somebody who is coming from the same political positions. So Magyar will probably succeed in something in which centristic, liberal, left opposition didn't have any serious chance. So what it says to us about situation in Hungarian society today? Did Orban succeeded in his aim to move whole society toward right-wing populism?
I think that is absolutely the case, that the left in Hungary is demoralized, if not moribund, and that Hungary has, over the span of Viktor Orban's 16-year reign, culturally shifted towards the right. That doesn't necessarily mean that Hungarian politics and policies need to be as discriminatory and, frankly, as mean and nasty as they have been under Hungary, in Hungary under Viktor Orban's reign. And that is the case, that yes, for all of the rightward leanings, culturally speaking, of the Hungarian electorate under Orban, and that's certainly Orban has done a lot to shape that worldview, it is not necessary that Hungarian politics need to be as mean, nasty, and as punishing towards minority groups as we have seen under Viktor Orban. And here I'm thinking of LGBTQ groups who simply want to live. They want to pursue their lives in a way that does not bother other people, but that is simply about living happily in a Hungarian way. And Viktor Orban, in contrast, has demonized these communities, has punished them, has outlawed certain things, just simply gathering together to celebrate their culture and to celebrate their lives under Pride, the Pride event. Viktor Orban has tried to make Pride events illegal in Hungary. And that to me is a sort of meanness and punishing approach to politics in Hungary that is not necessary even under a right-wing leaning government.
He was not targeting only minorities. He was targeting scientists. He was targeting your Central European University. He was targeting media.
Absolutely. It is interesting to me, as I've followed Petera Magyara's campaign around over the last several weeks, that in his stump speech, in his regular speech to crowds, he always mentions academic freedom. He says that he will restore the independence of academic institutions that Viktor Orban has taken away during his 16 years in power. And that to me is interesting that he mentions it in his regular campaign speech, Petera Magyara, because he doesn't need to. He knows that he's got the vote of academics and the intelligentsia in Hungary. He knows that the intelligentsia are against Viktor Orban because of Orban's absolutely corrupt approach to pilfering the educational system of huge amounts of money and putting it into the pockets of his friends. So Petera Magyara knows that Orban has lost the educated elite in Hungary, and yet he still mentions that that he will restore. He still makes a pledge to restore the independence of the educational sector, and that to me suggests that Magyar knows that any country that wants to have a sense of self-respect will be able to point to high scoring leading educational institutions like universities and say this is what we can produce as a culture and as a country. And so I think that's an important thing to note about Petera Magyar, that he has a strong sense of wanting to restore Hungary's pride in itself. And he knows that educational institutions, high leading, respectable, elite educational institutions can do that.
We saw Orban using support for Ukraine in his campaign. We saw him attacking not only Ukraine, but trying to fight with other neighbors, including Croatia. We saw him presenting European Union as evils, literally, on billboards. Do you think that he did everything he could, or he can still surprise us with something even more unbelievable in these last few weeks of campaign?
It is possible. I do not take anything off the table. If Viktor Orban really does get desperate, and there are lots of signs that he is, in fact, very frightened of losing power, because he could face legal action, prosecution, and perhaps even jail under Hungarian law, under existing Hungarian law, that there could be some kind of military false flag operation, some kind of ginning up of a real militarized, violent international incident. Now, I'm not entirely sure that Viktor Orban is going to do that himself, because Vladimir Putin is also getting nervous, because Hungary really, if anybody needs Viktor Orban to stay in power, it's Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin has never been very good about, when he sees his own interests threatened, he's going to take independent action. It doesn't matter whether his local allies want it or not. If Vladimir Putin is anything, it's paternalistic. And if he decides that he wants Orban to stay in power, even if Orban says, please don't do X, Y, or Z, it's very possible that Vladimir Putin will just do it. So even if Viktor Orban does not gin up some kind of militarized international incident, it's very possible that Vladimir Putin will do it on his own. So I would say that the next several weeks, the next month or so, we've got more than a month left before the election, could absolutely see some kind of volatile action that is thoroughly unexpected and unprecedented in the European continent. That's something that we have to absolutely be aware of and watch out for.
Mark, thank you very much for your time and for your analysis.
Thank you.
Hvala i vama, dragi gledatelji. Bio je Marc Loustau sa Centralnoeuropskog sveučilišta. Analizirao je situaciju u Mađarskoj uoči izbora, ali samim time onda i u Europskoj uniji. Ne zaboravite se pretplatiti na naše Spotify i YouTube kanale. Bile su ovo Ideje HR.